to the coronavirus pandemic was to start an oil price war with Russia, which has forced the price down in a matter of weeks, the international oil price down in a matter of weeks, from over $60 a barrel to nudging $30 a barrel, which has upended the budgets of most of Africa's oil exporting countries. Shows, where we are in terms of international collaboration. The key things that the G20 was asked to do was to bump up funding to the International Monetary Fund to some $2 trillion to enable it to intervene in countries' economies across the world. It was also meant to agree a fund to commission research and the distribution of medical equipment to combat this virus. I mean, that was going to be a $20 billion commitment, and it did none of that at all. It just said it's gravely concerned about the state of developing economies, and it's committed to do everything it takes, but absolutely no solid commitments and timelines. The third thing it was meant to do was to back the IMF and World Bank calls for an immediate program of bilateral debt relief. And again, to the 76 poorest countries in the world. And again, it failed to do anything. So the mood about multilateralism at the moment is pretty negative. It seems that overwhelmingly we've seen a self-interested, short-term and nationalistic response to this.
What about on the continent? The Afreximbank, say they're launching a $3 billion facility. The African Development Bank is doing a sort of a corona bond in US dollars to try and support countries. And then, parts of the international system which do seem to be at least in part switched onto the problems. I mean, Ghana, for example, has already been in contact with the IMF over a rapidly dispersing credit facility. If the global overarching picture is bad, where are the sort of the rays of light?
Well, I think the African institutions are moving ahead. And first of all, you had that statement by the Economic Commission for Africa under Vera Songwe, the UN's Economic Commission for Africa. And they made the point very clearly that whatever the health hit to Africa from the coronavirus epidemic, it's really not clear just how bad that's going to be. The economic hit is already started, and they came up with this figure of 100 billion. They produced a report as she convened a meeting of African finance ministers last week, and they're now trying to coordinate. Now, I think that's a really good sign, and it seems on the back of that the Afreximbank's $3 billion coronavirus trade facility is going to help, and definitely the African Development Bank. Interestingly, I mean, it was a $3 billion bond. It's called the Fight COVID-19 Social Bond. It's got buy-in from the ADB's traditional customers, and it's come at a really important time. So I think that's an effective initiative. But they do need to get to back that up. They do need to get some sort of buy-in for the other demands that the ECA were making and have been made by leaders such as Ramaphosa in South Africa and Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia, that there needs to be action on debt relief and some sort of suspension of debt service, at least for the duration of the economic effects of this crisis this year. So I think Vera Songwe at the ECA calculated that would be around $44 billion of suspended payments that would give relief to the most indebted countries in Africa. So, I mean, that would be a very, very positive thing. I think the other initiatives that are being discussed are a little bit more creative, and they're coming from NGOs across Africa and some economists. And one of them is that there should be some sort of trade-off for trade and aid. So plenty of countries have restrictions on the import of medical equipment and goods and services and so on, and they actually earn tariffs from them. And so there's been a proposal to suspend those tariffs in exchange for a free flow of that equipment. And again, that could really help buttress health services and improve readiness and preparation if the virus position really deteriorates in other countries beyond where it is at the moment in South Africa and Egypt.
Talking about sort of creative business ideas, we published on the website just this morning a piece which looks at what needs to be done to save the garment and apparel industry in Kenya and in Ethiopia. And it makes the point that, roughly $400 million worth of investment has gone into the Hawassa industrial zone, which is mostly garments in Ethiopia. That's a huge investment, which is now under threat. An investment of just $1 million would keep those workers' wages subsidized. That seems like a small price to pay for something quite important. But then also, perhaps these factories should be retooled to produce personal protective equipment, for example. Lisa, in South Africa, have there been creative approaches to how to handle coronavirus?
There have been, Nicholas. I mentioned in the story I wrote about the lockdown that the government has started a solidarity fund to which it's contributed a sizable amount of seed capital. They've also, had a systemic response institutionally. So, for example, if you're a small business in good standing and your tax affairs are in order, then they've made a provision that you can delay paying, pay as you earn tax to SARS, which is the South African Revenue Service. They've also made a provision for people whose businesses are in distress and who are in a position not to pay workers, that you can make an application so that your workers can be paid. So there are a suite of measures to make sure that they mitigate against, a widespread sense of distress among businesses. There's also the Ministry of Small Business. They've also announced a package for small businesses in the country to enable them to sustain themselves throughout this period, this 21-day period of a lockdown. In addition to that, I'd just like to mention to you that with all of this happening, today at midnight SA time, Moody's is going to announce its ratings decision on the country. So there's also that consideration that South Africa has to contend with, in addition to dealing with the crisis and the fallout from this COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, that certainly has come at a good time, hasn't it? There's I mean, a lot of money has left South Africa, and that's why the government has started this, what they're calling asset purchasing, but other people call quantitative easing. Well, what's your thoughts on the stability of the financial system, and how might that play into the Moody's rating decision?
You know what? I'm not worried, hey. South Africa's local capital markets are quite deep and they're liquid. We've got a well-established financial sector. and a very good regulator of it. So I really am not too, concerned about that. I'm more worried about what this is going to do to manufacturing, what this is going to do to your mining sector and all of those sectors. Our financial system is quite resilient. And it's also, well capitalized as well. I don't see too many assets that are in distress in that space. So I'm not too concerned. Maybe I'm being nonchalant, but I don't think so.
Great. How about in Nigeria? Tofe, you were saying that the private sector is perhaps not fully switched on to the severity of what's coming. Is that still true today?
It is getting better now that the different state governments seem to be getting more worried. But at the beginning of the week, it did seem like most private companies were under the impression that they've been around for decades, they don't close, and why should they do it now? A lot of them did try and implement measures in the office. For example, in lunch halls, people had to sit further apart, but these are big offices with like over 1,000 people, so even that wouldn't really help. But now that we've come to the end of the week, more companies are sending their workers home and saying that they don't have to come in and should work from home instead. People are worried the government has come under a bit of heat because a large percentage of the Nigerian population don't have the financial capacity to stay at home, or they do jobs that they can't do from home. Our former vice president Atiku did he put out a statement saying that the government should give 10,000 naira to every household as a stimulus package. And he himself pledged the donation of 50 million naira to help, and said individuals and corporations that do have the financial capacity to try and help the larger public, but we haven't seen the stimulus package actually come into fruition. We don't know if the government is going to do it. I know Sanwo-Olu, the Lagos state governor, has been getting a lot of kind of heat for shutting the markets without first putting an alternative in place for the people that do need their day-by-day pay. So we're going to wait to see what happens, but it does seem that they haven't yet found a solution, but they have told people to stay at home, which is a bit worrying for the majority of the population.
And do you think we will see the churches packed on Sunday, or are they really understanding that this is it's a horrifically efficient way of spreading the virus? I know here in France, there's a huge cluster in the east of the country that people couldn't explain. Then they realized there was a big reunion of evangelicals. About 3,000 of them got together and have been spreading the virus far and wide in Alsace in France. Have the Nigerian churches realized that they have to lock up for now?
So from last Sunday, churches weren't supposed to hold, but there were some churches that went ahead and did it anyway. I would say, the public backlash on that was quite bad. The pastors that did go ahead were kind of insulted on social media and things like that. I would like to believe that this means that they would stop, but I am quite cynical. There's some particular churches that are insisting on going on. There's some churches or some pastors that don't believe the virus can get to their congregation because of this prayer that they're doing on Sunday, so they don't want to stop. The same with mosques, even though a lot of imams have told their people to stop Friday prayers and their daily prayers congregating. There are some religious people that do believe that it can't get to them, and they do have to continue praying to ensure it doesn't get to them. So I'm cynical about all churches stopping, but I guess we'll see on Sunday.
Anne-Marie, someone described Cairo to me as the birthplace of the conspiracy theory. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but one of the things that our colleague in Abidjan was telling us about was the huge amount of half-truths, fake news, conspiracy theories being circulated on WhatsApp groups in Côte d'Ivoire. Do you get the impression that is also happening in Egypt?
It wouldn't surprise me, and to be honest, in a country like that where superstition flies just as high as depopulation. I mean, you're bound to get a lot of that, which is probably why the government has often erred on the side of paranoia when